Live here. All right, cool. What's up, everybody? We are live, and Coach David here, along with some special guests, Professor Muhammad and David Aguzzi. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Aguzzi?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, all right. And David Aguzzi with Grappling Industries. How you fellas doing this morning?
Good. Thank you for having
Doing
me.
good.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
So,
thanks for being on.
so David, we were talking a little bit pre-show that you've got a 1-year-old at home.
Yep. It turns one in 2 weeks.
1 and 2 week, man. That's a special. I believe it's the worst phase of parenting because either you've just got this kind of crying machine doesn't understand what you're saying or how to deal with it. A lot of people think the teens are harder to deal with, but I got a lot of experience with teens. How's it going though? Is he sleeping through the night? How's he doing?
Not sleeping too much, but he's a really good baby. He's a very happy baby. Um, so that's been great. I think uh, I think it'll be funner to see him in the teens than it is like at this phase right now of the being 1 or 2 years old. But it's been a thrill.
They
You say that now. You say that now,
You say
David.
that
Wait
now.
till they get to be teenagers.
Yeah.
so David, I want to I want to respect your time. I know you're a busy guy, so we're gonna get kind of right into it. I'll lead into a little bit who you are, what you do, and then if you could just give us a background, and then we'll get into some of the questions that we had. So, Grappling Industries, obviously, you own Grappling Industries, and it's kind of blown up even since I've been competing of it. So, can you give us a little bit about how you got into jiu-jitsu, how you got into even managing and running, Grappling Industries as we know it today, and then kind of how just the history behind it.
All right. Jiu-jitsu, my brother, I have one brother, he's 7 years older than me. So when I was, I think like 12, he was 19. He started training like at a self-defense gym that also had some grappling classes and kickboxing classes. And of course, like I wanted to do everything my brother wanted to do. Um, so I went to a couple classes. I really was intrigued by it, the self-defense and the kickboxing. And he brought home, it sounds stereotypical, but he brought home a VHS of UFC. And that was the UFC where Tito Ortiz beat up Guy Mesger, but at the end of the fight, Tito shot a double leg and Guy Mesger caught him in a guillotine choke. And I was just so intrigued by how this guy got beat up, but he just wrapped his neck up and he made this guy quit, after getting beat up by this guy, and that made me really want to take grappling classes at that gym. So I started taking the grappling classes more seriously. After a year, I decided I wanted to go really deeper into that. So I switched to what was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym in Montreal at the time, where I'm from. Um, at the time, it was all blue belts and one purple belt, and sometimes a black belt would come from Brazil to do some rare belt gradings or a seminar. It was a Nova Young gym at the time. It was affiliated with Wagner Fabiano and Leonardo Santos. Um, and I love jujitsu. I started going every day, taking like a bus pass to go downtown from the South Shore of Montreal. In the summers when I didn't have school, I would go twice a day. I would start to stay at the gym all the time. And then once I started competing, I really got that competition bug. So I started competing as much as I could. Um, I just absolutely loved it. My dream when I was a kid, before my body started to fall apart, was to either train and open a gym like so many other jujitsu practitioners, or go MMA, go pro in MMA. I had about 8 amateur fights, which is a big thing in Montreal. We have a big MMA scene here, and I just loved training and competing. Um, when I was a little older, around 21, and I was in university, I wanted to go to the Euros, which are in the Euros at the time were in Lisbon, in Portugal. But I didn't have very much money. Having to spend my money on either training at two, three different gyms and coaches and such. I decided that I was going to have to find a way to actually make that money to go to the Euros. I'm not a big fan of GoFundMe for those types of things. I was giving some classes in jujitsu, I was giving some privates in jiu-jitsu, but it wasn't enough. Clearly, like getting 40, $50 a class or 25, $30 a private is not going to pay for a trip from Montreal to Lisbon and then the tournament registration fees and at the time a hospital, of course. Um, so I decided eventually, like, I'm not very good at selling t-shirts at the time. I'm 21. I'm in university. I'm training full time. So I decided that I would try to run a tournament because the one thing I noticed from competition is when I was a kid, there was lots of tournaments in Montreal, and then there was like a dry spell. There was like no tournament.
What so I guess what year was this? What year are we talking when you're trying to go to the Euros? Because I mean that was just a vastly different scene altogether.
Completely different scene. That was 13 years ago. So
Oh,
this
that's
was
recent, more recent than I thought.
Yeah, this was January 2011, I think was that particular Euros.
What and so just I'm pretty sure I hear it. You're from Montreal. Is that a French accent I'm hearing? You know, a lot of French influence in
Uh
the
yeah, it would be a mix of like French Italian accent, yeah.
French Italian. Okay, all right. Those are the two sexiest. You know, if you ask the women, you know, maybe right up there with English. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, Montreal's very European actually.
are there a lot of people who do GoFundmes for like to send like GoFundMe send me to tournaments? I've never seen one. I probably would have
I think they were very
posted it.
popular like 7 to 10 years ago. Like there was also makeachamp.com that had come out, I believe, that was like very popular
I remember
for
that. Yeah, I remember that.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember
But
that.
I'm not a fan of that stuff. Like I'm a fan like if you're really at the top level, but this was brown belt Euros in 2011 that I was trying to get to, and I don't think that like for brown belt it was the time to do GoFundMe's or I'm one of those people that really believe in like you need to work to make money to like support what's still considered a hobby at the time
Mm,
before you become professional. Like unless you're making money full time at something, I didn't consider myself a professional at that. So
yeah.
I thought it would make sense maybe because there was like I was saying there was lots of tournaments in Montreal when I was like 13, 14, 15. There would be a tournament in Montreal organized by a different gym in Montreal every couple of months. And
Mm,
then when I was like 17, they would actually start renting venues and putting mats down in those venues, and it was a pretty cool thing for me. But from like 17 to 21, we started having to travel for tournaments, like going to New York or Chicago or Columbus, or of course, if you wanted to go to Worlds, you had to go to LA, which luckily for us, when I was like 13, it was the Worlds were in Brazil, of course. So eventually they got moved to LA and it gave everyone a chance, like more in North America, to actually attend the Worlds. Um, but I thought maybe since there hadn't been a tournament in a while in Montreal, like organizing something like that would give me an opportunity to run something, and if there, hopefully, there would be some money left over uh, to actually fund this trip to the Euros. Um,
so you thought, and that's it. You know, that's interesting. Is that, and you were a brown belt at the time, so you're like, hey, I want to go win worlds, and then hopefully there'll be some money left over. You were expecting like a payday from winning worlds.
no, I was trying to run this tournament, right? That would fund my trip to the Euros.
What was the name of the tournament?
I think that one was called The Beatdown, which was based on that movie that had come out called Never Back Down.
That hey, never back down, dude. Never back down got me into jiu-jitsu. Like
Yeah, it was fun. It was
that's
fun.
a that's like that was one of the ones that was like, all right, I'm gonna learn jiu-jitsu. Is that, and that's the one? No, that's not Channing Tatum. Fighting is the one with Channing Tatum, but Never Back Down was okay for what I mean for what it was.
It was what it was.
They right. What? So then how'd you get into grappling industries? Like how did that start?
So
How'd you get into it?
I ran that tournament, and like I had a friend who gave me the designs. The gym lent me their gym for the day that had like lots of space for mats. By the end, my brother, who was also like at this point like almost 28, also had a full-time job where he was a traveling consultant, so he had like lots of points for travel. He was like elite status. So he just gave me the points for the flight. And I basically took like half that money I made from that tournament, put it into my Euros trip, and the other half I had donated actually to the Montreal Children's Hospital.
Oh, that's sweet.
Um, and then I went to the Euros. That was it. I never thought anything of it. That tournament I ran that January had like 30 competitors. So I thought, what? But one of my best friends had actually gone to that tournament. He was like, "Hey, you should try to build this." And I guess like if he hadn't said that, I wouldn't have taken that seriously. But he had said that, and so he was like, "You should rent a venue. You should try to buy mat. You should try to buy mats." And like it turned into this thing of like trying to provoke me to do something. So at the time, I had been working a factory job while going to university and trying to train full time. So I
What
did
were you
try to.
studying
I was
at the
studying
university?
history. History.
Oh, okay.
What,
Yeah, I
what,
wanted.
David? I have to ask. How does a history degree? Wait, hang on. You were studying to like major in history,
I was studying to major in history. I was
and what
either
does
going to
one
be
do with
a.
a major in history? How does one make money with a major like next to like a liberal arts
listen,
degree?
listen. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Right.
Uh huh. Yeah, none of
I,
them do. But
I
yet we're
you know,
loaded on six
I come
figures.
from Italian immigrant parents who didn't go to university, and their dream was for me and my brother to go to university. Like if I got
I
to
get it.
redo it, if I got to redo the whole thing, like clearly today I'd be a lawyer
Yeah.
or something like finances or something.
Yeah.
But
Legal, medical, fine. Yeah, sure. Yeah, like
for
the
me, it would have been legal or finance. That's probably the direction I would have gone into. But for at the time, Italian immigrant parents are like, just go. So I was going to be like a history teacher, a history professor, probably, if that was the path I would have
what
taken
are
in life.
so can I, if you don't mind, I mean, you don't have to answer, this wasn't on our list, so you don't have to answer this. What is like Italian immigrant parents, because you hear that a lot, right? Like they come from the old country, and they're taught, they hear about this American dream, and the university is a big deal. Like it's the first one. They didn't have the opportunity or the resources, whatever. We want our kids to have something we didn't. What is that? I mean, what is that like? Like what is the messaging? Because I can tell you what the messaging was like as a high schooler in America, but what is the messaging that you guys are hearing? Like if you go to college, what were you being told about it? Like about college and why you needed it? Like what was the, I know they wanted it to be like so proud of you, which I'm sure they're proud of you regardless, especially looking at you now. But like what was the messaging that you as a child kind of got from your immigrant parents who obviously just want the best for you?
Yeah, I think it was just that it was hard without a university degree, that a lot of the better jobs nowadays were going to ask for university degrees. You were going to be able to have a better job. You were going to make more money. Um, Nowadays, I mean, we know that the university degree basically represents you going somewhere and completing something and showing that you could show up and actually do something at a semi decent skill, which is what a lot of employers, I guess, look at the university degree for now. But for immigrant parents, it was just like, it's like, we didn't have this, we struggled.
Mm,
If you get this, you'll struggle less and you'll be able to give more to your kids one day.
mm,
Um, Now, I'm a big fan of university, like of the right majors in university. Like
sure,
I
sure.
wouldn't advise my kid to go into history. I would advise them to go into like law or finance or something business oriented. My wife has a business degree, for instance, and a business master's. Um, but like for immigrant parents, yeah, it was really like you just have to go there. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you get the certificate, it'll open more doors. Something about opening doors,
Mm-hmm.
they don't know because they don't have a degree, right?
Sure.
So it was just this idea that this
It's this
paper will
magic
open
wand,
doors.
like you get one
Magic
and
wand.
things just happen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's really what it was.
So you were all right. So your boy, your best friend, at the time, he's like he goes, he sees the tournament. He's like David, I really think you could do this,
Yeah, he
and he
competed.
starts pumping up something that you had no intention of ever doing. Is he did he kind of help you like do that, or did
Yeah,
that
yeah,
just like
yeah. He helped
rip
me.
start?
He helped me a bunch at the beginning. Um, I think by the time I had my first tournament, which was August later that year, I had saved up like 2 grand. Um, Took a little loan from the bank, bought some mats, rented a really nice school downtown Montreal, and tried to have my first event. And
How'd it go?
it had 70 competitors. But the first one had 32, so we're making progress now, right?
I agree. I
This is
agree.
how it starts. And then from that point, like the one thing we had talked about a lot was like it had to be consistent, right? It couldn't just be one tournament a year. It had to be like every time you would have a tournament, there would be a next date booked already for a tournament. So we had that tournament in August, mid-August of 2011, and there was already another tournament booked for the end of the year in 2011. And from there, it started rolling with the Montreal tournaments.
How
I
did
think
so how were those tournaments ran? Like now we obviously use smooth smooth comp. How were they
paper
ran?
brackets,
You
paper
said what?
brackets,
Just
paper
paper brackets?
brackets.
Oh my
At the
gosh.
time, it was like
Ju-
hand drawn, right? So this is one thing I have to say is like if you come from that age of tournaments and you were promoting back then, you learned a lot about how to run a tournament because you had to know how to draw your own brackets. Um, After we learned how to draw our own brackets, eventually we hired a company who would help us with the brackets. But even then, that was still paper brackets before Smooth Comp. Um, but yeah, they were paper brackets, so
I
everything was
remember
pencil and
I remember that like they would call your name over and there'd be a guy there and he'd be like, "All right, David Fox, Michael Smith, all right, follow me." And he'd take the
Yeah.
sheets to the table and you're like, I hope that paper doesn't get lost, like
exactly.
that's
Just a few
crazy.
years ago, I remember seeing paper brackets just a few years ago. Like they were doing that, a couple other venues were doing that just a few years ago. Like, you had those papers on the sheets and they were walking around with those papers. So it's not that old that I think everybody's transitioned to like complete digital.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last time we were on paper was 7 years ago. So it's been a little while. I mean, it's much easier without paper. Like the night before, having to print everything out and put it in
Mm.
an order by which mat it's supposed to be on, and which order on that mat each paper should be on. Like, yeah, that was exhausting. That was
Well,
So
and what I go ahead.
at what point did you like say, okay, now it's time to scale? Like you're getting, you're having some consistent tournaments, and you have these ideas that are popping up to kind of streamline this tournament. At what point do you realize, okay, like you're early to the show, and you're around before lots of other people are likely going to get into this industry? At what point are you like, okay, now we have to take it seriously, we have to like really put our business minds on, and we plan on being here for a while? Because like I said, you're early, you're one of the founders of the tournaments. At what point is it like, okay, now we're going to really do something with this?
I think it was like after 5 or 6 Montreal tournaments. Um, the closest city to Montreal in Canada is Toronto, the next major city. It's about a 6 hour drive. And it was like, there must be competitors in Toronto. Like when you go look up their tournaments, they have competitors. At this point as well, UAE Jiu Jitsu had expanded to Montreal, and so had the IBJJF. The UAE at the time was doing like the tournaments where there would be like 8 trips to Abu Dhabi, like completely revolutionary jiu-jitsu tournaments at the time. I mean, it went away for a while, and all the trip ideas went away, but stuff started to expand now. Um, I think it was for us. It was like paying back these mats and trying to actually purchase more stuff, like change from flipboards to laptops and monitors, like having 100 competitor tournaments in Montreal, which wasn't a completely developed jiu-jitsu scene yet. We needed to have another city, especially since if we only have 4 Montreal tournaments a year, what are we doing with the rest of our time, if you want to try to build something out of this. So we started going to Toronto, loading all the mats into a truck, driving it 6 hours to Toronto, and then trying to do events in downtown Toronto. And that turned out to be very beneficial because Toronto turned out to be 4 or 5 times bigger than the Montreal market. So from there, we went from 4 events a year in Montreal to now 8 events a year, 4 in Montreal and 4 in Toronto.
Were you? So are you full time now at this point? Grappling, like are
I've,
you?
I've been full time, yeah,
No,
for.
no, 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 no. Obviously,
Oh, at this point,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
at this,
Like when you first moved to Montreal, are you full time? Or are you still working? You still doing like day work?
I think I was still doing day work until after a year of it. Um, so the thing about that is like after a year, I wasn't making money personally. I was the thing that allowed me, and this is something I talk about with my wife a lot. One of the advantages I had after the first year of being able just to focus solely on the project was that because of my immigrant parents and they're Italians, I wasn't in the type of household that would get kicked out when I'm 18 or 21. I lived in their basement like a stereotypical millennial when you think about it. But I was very close to my parents and my brothers. So as Italians, like you stay in the house as long as you need before you move out.
Okay, okay. Hang
That's
on.
awesome.
I'm
That's
gonna
awesome.
interrupt. I'm gonna
I
interrupt
love that.
now.
Yeah,
Hang on a second, David.
yeah,
As a
The drill
millennial,
sergeant is here.
yeah.
Go ahead.
as
I'm
a
just
Drill
saying.
millennial,
sergeant
no, no,
being
no. As a
X.
millennial, there's a lot difference than Billy playing Call of Duty in his parents' basement
No, that's what I'm
and
saying.
David working and building a business and saving money for and being a contributing
Yeah.
member of the household.
I just
Totally
meant
different thing.
stereotypical that I actually lived in their basement,
Yeah, sure, sure,
like
sure.
of my parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were
Immigrant.
doing something.
Immigrant.
You were building something though.
I
I mean,
was
like
building
that's
something. I was building something. So
So
that gave me the advantage of being able to leave the day job and like I mean I would get paid. I think my first year I got paid like 2 3 grand of the company profits because it was just like we need to buy more mats. Like the Toronto event can't run 6 rings, it needs like 12 14 rings now. So and everything was tatami based back then. So we need to buy more tatamis. And I was storing the tatamis in my dad's garage, my parents' garage.
wow, that's funny. That's
So
awesome.
their garage was just mats and mats and mats
So,
and then it's like
so
I need
during
barricades.
During this time, are your parents seeing this? I mean, I can just imagine immigrant parents seeing, like, they have this vision. My son's got to go to school, get a degree, and get a job. And they kind of see you spending more time. And, like any business, now the business starts to come home. You're putting your business stuff at home, you're
So
filling up the garage with the mats. Are they like, what the hell are you doing? Go back to school. What are your
so
parents saying at this time?
so this is we're at the point now like after the first year in Toronto, it's been like 2 years of this, that I had 6 months left in the university degree. It was 3.5 years of the 4 years were done, one more semester, and I was just like, you know what, I think I'm going to work with grappling industries. And they're like,
Oh,
wait,
no.
what? Like, yeah, that
Oh,
caused some
no.
rift. But you know what, my mom from Montreal and Toronto was the check-in worker, and my father would help me with the setups the night before with whichever setup workers would come help me, and my dad would help me as well with the weigh-ins. So my parents were just so supportive. Like just my
Oh, that's
my
great.
my dad went to the first like 50 tournaments of mine. You know,
Wow, that's awesome.
so
That's awesome.
that is again like another benefit of how I got so successful. Um, and then sometime I don't man the story starts to get weird because like in the middle of the night a competitor of mine who used to compete at these Toronto tournaments, he had moved to Australia, and he started sending me messages in the middle of the night because of the time exchange, and he was saying like the scene in Australia is dominated by one brand, and that brand is not really developing itself. The medals are cheap, they're also like weaker paper brackets, single elimination, very expensive. Maybe you can slide in here. And like, man, of course, I didn't know where Australia was. And the whole thing sounded so foreign to
You
me.
went to major in history and you didn't know where Australia was. I'm just playing. I'm just playing with you. I'm
Well,
just
geographically now I'm perfect. I can point out every country on the map, but it's just like at the time it was like Australia is the furthest point from Montreal you can ever get to
100%.
now.
Yeah.
So I don't know why, but I was looking at like the competitor list he was sending me and the pictures of the medals and the pictures of the tournaments and some footage he had taken for me. And I don't know why, but I said I would do it. And it was
Wow.
actually a loan from my brother. I think my brother lent me half the money I needed, and I put up the other half, and I expanded to Australia. And I went to Australia for the first 4 or 5 sets, and that was about 10 years ago.
So
You
you lived
know,
in Australia.
I would go to Australia for when we would do like 2 3 tournaments at a time, and I would go to Australia for 40 days at a time on a business visa. So
Wow.
like the first year and a half, I spent like at least 5 months in Australia, trying to develop that. That was 10 years ago. Grappling Industries now is like arguably the biggest brand in Australia as far as tournaments, like consistently, consistently very large tournaments in Australia across like 5 6 cities there.
That
Um,
is amazing.
Is
That's
the other?
amazing.
I mean, it should. Is the other tournament that you
yeah,
went
they're
over
very
there?
big. They're still very big too now. Actually, they're the Australian
That's why
Federation
he's
of.
not saying that. That's why we're not saying the name. They
Yeah, yeah.
I was
The
curious if you snuffed them
IBJJF,
out.
the IBJJF used to do a tournament there once a year, and they decided to stop and just collaborate. And that's very rare that the IBJJF would collaborate with someone, but the IBJJF collaborated with their tournament brand.
Hmm.
Um, and so they have a tournament once a year, September or October, I would say, called the Pan Packs. So it gives Australians a chance to earn points towards the IBJJF rankings because black belts need
That's
points to
cool.
compete in worlds. So they did create that collaboration, and now Australia has like new tournament brands all the time. Like it is really a blossoming jiu-jitsu scene, not just because of like a few guys like Lachlan Giles and Craig Jones, of course, but like there's a lot of jujitsu there. Like they're supporting like 1,000 competitor tournaments every couple of weeks from different brands, and
Wow,
then
So let,
that's
I think
insane. Every couple
yeah,
weeks, there's 1,000 competitive. How big is Australia? I gotta look this up. I gotta look
not
this
sure
up.
what the population is. I could ask Google.
I'm just like that is because I don't think it's like that. How big? I feel like it's the size of
so
Texas.
Da-
It's really
but-
spread out too. Like like there's Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and Gold Coast, and up north there's towns and Cairns. And then far west is Perth. There's Adelaide in South Australia. So there's a lot of cities
Oh, it's
with
pretty big.
developing
Like
centers.
it's 80% the size of America. All right,
Yeah.
so it's substantially
what's
larger
the
than I.
population there?
I don't know. I don't know. Like
So, David, I got a question. We're talking about how grappling industries got started, like where it is. You know, we got to see that um, it started very small in Canada and grew through your parents' garage into becoming now a global tournament brand. So we have lots of people who beginners, people from all across the states that watch the podcast. What have you seen about competing and the type of people that are competing? Because when you compete at a tournament, so one of the biggest fears is like, well, I'm kind of a hobbyist, and I just want to maybe my instructor professor is asking me to jump in and just try it out, and I'm afraid I'm going to go compete against somebody who's like a professional or kind of does this for a living. Can you talk to us about what you've seen as far as the trend of who's competing back then, who's competing now, and also what it takes from your experience to become successful at competing outside of professional athletes?
Well, back then it was like you had to compete to move up belts. I mean, if you wanted to be a blue belt, you had to compete and win the white belt tournaments. And if you wanted to be a purple belt, you had to compete regularly at blue to make it to purple. I don't think it's like that anymore. Like, there's gyms that have grading, like what is it, attendance cards. There's gyms that, if you just, there's gyms where there's people that don't compete, right? So if they show up for a year or two, they're going to get their blue belt. And now that there's so many more gyms, the, the knowledge between what it is to grade someone to blue or purple has completely changed from back then, of course. Like it took me 2 years to get a blue belt. Nowadays you can get blue belts in 6 months by just showing up 3 4 times a week at a lot of gyms. Um, so back
They
then,
this what year is this? Like what year do you think like it was tournaments were required when you started for competition? Because that's kind of how we cut our teeth. It was very much
yeah,
like it was
2000,
unspoken. It was never spoken, but it was like, yeah, you better do well at this tournament if you want to get
the
to the
early 2000s, I would say, like 2002, 2003, like you had to compete. Like if you asked your professors, like, what do I have to do to move up to the next belt? The first thing is like, you're not getting promoted now for another year for even asking that question. But it would be like, well, you have to compete. Like if you can beat all the white belts and start beating all the white belts and some blue belts in the gym, then you can be a blue belt. Like there seemed to be a higher degree of what you had to be that next belt, especially like at the time when there wasn't a lot of gyms. Every gym wanted to make sure they had the best at each rank, right? um
Do you so I'm very familiar with that mentality of like, you take the throne and you win the bracket, you take the crown type mentality. Do you think that's an accurate representation of like belt ranking
Now
ever?
it depends, right? There's people who are competitionally exceptional, and like they are the level that should be shown as far as a sport level. But then there's people who have never competed, right? Like John Danaher. He's never competed, but like, are we gonna talk about it? John Danaher doesn't know jiu-jitsu because he hasn't competed. That doesn't make any sense. Like, he's one of the greater minds in jiu-jitsu right now as far as knowledge of breaking down a situation. Um, it's hard, man. It's really hard to answer that question.
The
There's
the
just there's the population that does jujitsu is so much more than back then now. Like at that time there was like 20 people in a jujitsu gym trying to figure it out. MMA gyms had 10 guys trying to lift weights and pound each other out to just become tougher. Now there's jujitsu gyms like every couple kilometers, every miles.
that you
Um,
know that I think so. I think it's interesting. It's interesting. I have a few thoughts on it. One is like nobody really like it. I'm just looking at it objectively. I started in '09, so that was a solid decade even before I got into it. But it was very much like that old school mentality. Is like, well, you better beat Professor, whoever's bracket because I don't want him talking smack about me or my belts. But
yeah,
then here's the question, right? Like, if let's just say it's not uncommon at all for a purple belt to catch a brown or a black belt. So because if you're using that same commutative property of like you beat someone so you're good enough to beat them, if a purple belt catches a black belt in the gym, is he now a black belt? What if that were to happen in a tournament? Like that's where it's
which it
kind of
does often now in no
it
gi.
happens regular.
In no
Yeah,
gi.
it's
Yeah.
not even
yeah.
noteworthy anymore. Honestly, like purple belt catches like a brown or black belt. I mean,
Well, that's the thing too. Like nowadays, like a lot of gyms, I don't want to get in trouble with it for this, but like a lot of gyms are not equal. Like some gyms are really developing the new game, and some gyms are still stuck on the old game. You have some gyms
What's
where the
new and
blue
old?
belts.
What's new and old? Give us an example.
I would say old, for example, is like where the actual competitors are training twice a day in gi and twice a day in no gi, but it's like that all the way up to competitions. Like there's no seasons for them. I think nowadays you're seeing the no gi guys, like you just mentioned, that are lower belts, tapping higher belts. They're training solely no gi, and they're training stuff like all the leg entanglements, all the leg locks. I think the traditional gi schools, with the old school masters, you don't see that as much anymore. There's still gyms, for example, that don't want to compete in grappling industries because we allow reaping at blue belt in the gi, and they just don't believe in reaping in the gi at all, or reaping in intermediate no gi for that matter. They just don't like it. Um, but this is such a huge characteristic of the future game of jiu-jitsu and the new game of jiu-jitsu, like reaping and 50-50 and all the type of different leg locks that are coming out now. I mean, they have to be learned, and it's not just how to apply them, it's how to defend them. So if you're not teaching
Definitely.
them and you're not teaching how to defend them, you know I mean, I the first time I got exposed to it, I went to a gym. It was in Seattle when I was doing a press tour there, and they were excellent. Like, it was, I didn't expect anything from this gym, but it was just a room filled with killers, and they were all working on modern day stuff. Before other gyms, like the other gyms I had pressed toward that week, they were not doing leg locks. They were still doing like lapel chokes in the gi that were very low percentage, or just basic old techniques that you would have gotten from a very traditional solo Ribeiro tape, for example. Even though I love those tapes. But this gym, like this other gym that were filled with killers, they were going over some very interesting scenarios on one guy would attack the leg lock, the other guy would then defend the leg lock. And it really felt like we had watched EBI, right? Like when the first EBIs came out with Eddie Cummings and Gio Martinez. Eddie Cummings, I think, when he exposed his leg lock game, it made people realize, wow, no one really knows how to defend against Eddie Cummings. It was a new game he introduced into jiu-jitsu, and he made people look really silly really quickly. Then there was that time that Gio Martinez managed to beat Eddie Cummings in EBI, and that was like the shift of like, you can defend it if you practice it. I
Well,
think
and
that's what new jiu-jitsu is. There's new stuff coming out, and if you don't add that stuff into the training of the gym, that gym's going to start to fall behind a little bit.
I
So,
think
so I
that.
have a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, David.
Well, and the argument of like blue belts shouldn't be reaping because of the danger factor. The stats are more injuries happen, more injuries happen from like a kimura, right? Like in terms of like more permanent injuries happen like from a, now granted, a lot more lot longer lasting injuries happen from like a reap that you just snap it
So
uncontrollably.
just to
But
comment on that actually really quickly, the number one injury in actual jiu-jitsu tournaments are not from submissions or reaps, they're actually from scrambles. Um, it's the scramble in an intense setting where someone like gets taken down, they pin out their arm, their arm gets trapped, their leg gets trapped in a weird way during an actual intense scramble. That's what's causing the injuries.
what
And like you see that in gyms as well, but in tournaments, because there's just that added bit of intensity, that's where the injuries are most commonly coming from.
that
So,
do you know the number one injury? Do you
I
track that?
don't. No,
Yeah, I'd be curious.
not a particular statistic on that, but from what I've seen, it's always a random scramble more than a neck crank or a kimura. But yeah, kimuras do, like 100% kimuras do cause more damage, more injuries than reaps so far. But I mean, we've also
so
started to
what?
see highlights of people jumping guard on other people and then
Oh,
their knees
dude,
getting blown out.
that should be illegal. Like jumping
Yeah,
guard under
yeah,
freaking
that's
probably purple
that's the
should be
next
illegal.
step.
Yeah.
So, David, what advice can you give for beginner, intermediate, and advanced? If you had to give a little bit of advice for anybody competing at those levels, doing this for as long as you have, if you could split them up into two or three categories, like what should people focus on at their gym, or what kind of training and preparation do they need to do in order to win? I know it's like, um, I know it's hard to factor. Like you have the cardio, the technical, or whatever. But if I just ask you that blank question, beginner, intermediate, and advanced, or just beginner and advanced, what do athletes need to focus on if they want to, from what you've seen, to give their best chance to win at these tournaments?
I think the first thing they should do is be consistent in the gym, right? Like if they're saying, I want to do a tournament that's taking place in my city in 2 months from now, they should consistently go to the gym. They should try to eat healthier. They should try to get some sleep. They should try not to drink, of course. Um, One thing I know that I've seen a lot is that competitors try to cut weight, especially at the lower ranks, like white and blue belt. Their first tournaments, they try to cut weight. They probably don't have any experience at cutting weight, and it's just going to make them perform less on the actual day of the event. So I would tell them not to cut weight either. Be
I
consistent
agree
in
with
the
that.
gym.
Yeah.
Try to eat cleaner. Try to sleep a little bit more. Maybe go for a few extra cardio runs or lift some weights lightly, and build up to that tournament beginning. Put in extra rows at the gym. That's what I would advise for a beginner. Intermediate, it starts to become like you're trying to figure out if you want to do this at a higher rank, right? So for me, it would be like adding that extra stuff I just said don't not to do. Like are you how far are you from the lower weight class? Like are you able to cut that weight? Do you know how to cut weight yet? Have you studied it? Um, the thing is, like the beginners, they need to just focus on doing jujitsu. They need to just focus on going to the gym and doing jujitsu. Once you love going to the gym and doing jujitsu, then you can start watching YouTube tapes, some extra stuff, or learning how to cut weight, water weight slightly, or just even being able to cut down your diet so it doesn't affect like peaking. Peaking is a very big thing in pro sports for the competition date, but you're not going to do that as a white belt. You don't White belts don't know how to peak
Yeah.
unless they're Division One wrestlers. So it's just adding
Yeah.
the extra details in. Um, Beginner and intermediate are not that different when you think about it. For advanced like black belts and professionals, like that's just a whole different game. That's like you have to really be dedicated to it. I know when I was getting ready for amateur fights, I was cornered by Faraz Zahabi for all
No
my
way.
amateur fights.
Wow.
um, and like
Wow.
it's a much more serious thing. Like you need to show up every single day for that. Like if you're going to Worlds and you're in the same division as a guy like Mikey Musumeci is training every single day, multiple times a day, in his garage, at the gym, with people who are better than him. He's trying to find people that are better than him. I guess that's part of the intermediate stage, right? Is like are you trying to roll with the best guys in class, or are you trying to have easy rolls in the class? um, I remember when I was a blue belt, I would want to roll with whoever the best guy in the class was, even if he killed me. I just felt like that made me so much better, you know. The pro level is just such a difficult thing. You need to show up consistently. You need to learn everything there is about sports and nutrition, weights, strength and conditioning. You need to. It's not just pro sports is not just really the skill, but it's everything around the skill as well. Like, have you guys have really great people? I'm sure, like world class athletes. They're just deads. Like
Mm.
their weight, their strength is a different level than the hobbyist. Their strength and conditioning is a different level than the hobbyist. Like you don't see Gordon Ryan getting tired in the gym rolling with brown belts and black belts. You don't see these guys being outstrengthened by hobbyists. Um, the whole
It,
package has to be complete at the pro level.
Yeah, it is such a different level. Like rolling with world class professional athletes, regardless of their size, it's like all the same. It's like they all have this from 150 to 250 pounds. I've noticed that all have this like the denseness and pressure that's like it's on a completely different level. It really is.
It's mindset thing too, right? Like you need to be scared to lose, like, and that has to drive you to go to the gym and be there every day. Like of course you have to learn how
Yep.
not to overtrain, but you have to be there because like the other person will be there. Like Michael
Yep.
Phelps in swimming would talk about on
Mm.
days off that other people were taking days off, like holidays, he would go because he was creating a bank of extra training sessions that he was doing.
Yep.
If you're traveling, you got to train. If you're traveling, you got to still eat well. It's a mindset of just like, this is, you want to be the best. Like it, a lot of people don't have that mindset. A lot of people are not scared enough to want to make sure that they don't fail. Like it's really a not fail thing, not be embarrassed.
One thing
So
that
so that's
go ahead, Mo.
go ahead, David.
No, you're good.
I was just gonna say. uh, like we're talking about a mindset of a competitor, a mindset of what it takes to win. And typically, to be a professional athlete, you have to think that way. Can the hobbyist survive in the growing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu circuit and not get like frustrated by the lack of ability to showcase their Jiu Jitsu and compete and have a good experience with these people popping in? Like, is
There
there
are
still room for that?
there are a lot more hobbyists in jiu-jitsu than professional athletes, right? And eventually like the pros will want to train with people who are similar minded than them, of course. That's why there'll be pro sessions like you see at New Wave or B Team or MMA gyms where there's only pros that are having a training session. There are a lot more hobbyists. Like the white belt classes are blowing up, blue belt classes are blowing up. And one thing I thought about when building Grappling Industries was, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the obstacle course Tough Mudder,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like
I've done it.
Tough Mudder isn't driven by professionals. It's driven by corporate hobbyists who just want to work out and accomplish a challenge. And Grappling Industries is building bigger and bigger based off of white belts and blue belts who just want to go to a tournament, get those experiences, get tons of fights in the round robin system. Um, it's not about like we always think about sports has to be developed by the most professional standard, but at the same time, most sports are done by hobbyists. I mean, if you look at basketball, more kids are
Mhm.
playing basketball at the park or on rec teams than actual pro sports. The same thing with hockey, the same thing with wrestling. Most people are never going to go professional. Most people don't want to go professional. A lot of people like training MMA, but they don't actually want to get into the cage and have a pro fight. Um,
I think that's a interesting, that's an interesting mindset of it too, right? Like I got into some I got some flack. It was on a BJJ fanatics group, and this guy's like, he asked the question, "I'm a hobbyist. Is it a waste of my time to go to Worlds?" And somebody commented, "Oh, dude, we're all hobbyists. You'll be fine." And I was like, we are like you're going to Worlds." I was like, that's just such a naive statement. He's like, "Well, I'm just saying a lot of people." I said, "No, no, no, dude. A lot of people are hobbyists. They like, and there may even be hobbyists at Worlds, but don't it was Masters Worlds. That's what it was. Yeah, it was
yeah,
Masters Worlds because he's like, "Oh, we all have to work the next day." I was like, I went to Masters Worlds 2 years ago, and the bracket above me had Lovato, and in my bracket, or it was 3 years ago, in my
yeah,
bracket was Sanchi.
yeah,
Okay, so like. Like, let's not mistake it for what it is, right? Like that's, I wouldn't say there are certainly hobbyists who do it, but there's also like there's the professional level of it too. What I really like about grappling industries format, there's other tournaments doing it, is competition is its own skill set. The ability to perform under pressure is its own skill set. The ability to have a game plan and stick to it is its own skill set. And what I really like about the round robin format is the number of matches. I mean, I think at Arnold's, I think I had 8 matches or 7 or 8 matches
yeah.
at black belt.
I
And
mean, it
so
takes longer to run, but at the same time, people seem to. That's what you're paying for, right? I guess in a tournament setting that is not worlds, you're paying for matches. You're paying to go with people from other gyms that you probably wouldn't have rode with in the first place if you had lost the first round and been eliminated from the tournament.
yeah,
So that's where the benefit is, especially for the hobbyists, white belts, blue belts, even purple belts.
absolutely. Yeah, grappling and that's I like those a lot because I get the I don't know. It's a tough sell for white belts. Especially if they go in and I don't know about you. My first match is like a warm up. Like my first match is like I will perform the worst of all my matches at my first match.
Well, you
You
have to
know,
be on. You have to figure out a way to be on for your first match. You don't want to give up a loss in your first match and then have to battle back from being 0-1 in a round robin either.
sure.
I think that's the thing. Like you need to be you have to be you have to try to be perfect. You have to try to go 4-0. I mean, it's tricky, of course, because it's a different setting of type of tournament, but you still have to do it. You have to figure
What's
out how to get going on the first one.
What's next for Grappling Industries? And just like, we were talking about new jujitsu and, jujitsu is evolving. Sometimes it evolves and it makes a full circle. Um, what's new? What's in is there anything new that's coming for Grappling Industries? And as you've grown and you're growing your company and the tournaments all across the world, is there anything new that you're doing or adding that some of our viewers would like to know, or that you're
Well,
excited about adding, other than just more tournaments?
well, the first thing is, of course, we're adding more tournaments. Like a week and a half ago, we were the first Western brand, non-Arabs, to make it into the Middle East. We had our
What
first
country?
tournament in Kuwait. We had
Oh, nice,
750 competitors in Kuwait, one of the
nice.
bigger tournaments in Kuwait. And we're going to start expanding throughout the Middle East now as well. We have another Kuwait tournament at the end of the year coming up. We're just looking to book that date. Um, we've been talking to the royal family in Qatar to add a tournament in Qatar, Saudi Arabia. The UAE is tricky because it's unlocked by the UAE Jiu-Jitsu Federation, like the AJP. But I think
Hmm.
we're going to try to slide in through Dubai, not Abu Dhabi. Um, then we're also trying to add cities like Almighty Kazakhstan is another one where we've been talking to the mayor to have us down. Thailand is a place that has been asking us for a while. Mexico is one. Like I don't know, everyone always wants to do Brazil first. But there's like jiu-jitsu that's just blowing up everywhere in the world, and like you'd be impressed by how many competitors there are in like Kazakhstan and Qatar, for instance. But as far as like how to actually make the tournaments better, I think one thing that I got exposed to in Kuwait is that cultural difference of the in the Middle East. It has to be put on like as a show. Like everything has to be beautiful, you know. Like the AJP UAE Jiu-Jitsu Federation, they do a really good job of making their shows look really beautiful. I think it's the production value of the shows have to be better. It makes people feel like they're more included in something bigger than just something in a gym. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard at the same time. Like I know one of the big conversations in jiu-jitsu right now that you're seeing Craig Jones taking place in is money in jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yep.
the other side that he's arguing with is arguing you need bigger sponsors for that. And I've talked to some of the biggest sponsors in the last like year, and it's like some of these brands don't want to touch combat sports. They won't even touch UFC, like Red Bull, for instance. I was talking to an account manager at Red Bull, like I think like a couple weeks ago, and he's like, "We don't touch combat sports." Um,
What? What? Because of the PR? Like what? Just
I think Red
why?
Bull had sponsored a Taekwondo series for a couple of years, and then after someone got hurt at a Taekwondo event, it was just like that was it. They're not touching combat sports anymore. Um, the thing is, it's just like jujitsu doesn't have the broadcasting yet either. And that leads to the next problem that jujitsu has a very hard time of actually being on real TV, right? Like right now,
Mm,
it's behind paywalls, either Flow Grappling or Fight Pass. Unless you're really into jiu-jitsu or MMA, it's hard to get our friends to watch it, as you guys probably know as
mm,
well. Like it's confusing, like what's happening, what's this half guard thing? Like they don't know what a half guard is, of course. Like why don't they just stand up is a consistent thing.
yeah.
That's what makes MMA interesting is there's still some type of striking and ground and pound to the whole aspect of it. Broadcasting seems to be the thing, but and then the argument from broadcasting leads to like maybe we should make the rules uh, less tight so they're easier to understand. But jujitsu is still itself is still so chaotic that it's hard for someone to understand. Like my mom would come watch me at the jiu-jitsu tournaments when I started it. She had no clue what was going on, man. You know, and this is
Hmm.
someone who had been to a couple of them now. You know, my dad is like, "Oh, does he have his arm wrapped around the guy's neck yet?" He doesn't know the name of the submissions. So that's one thing that's really tricky. Is it just the general public doesn't seem to understand what's happening. I think something I've been thinking about a lot actually. It has to start in the gym, because there's a lot more people going to the gym, and then it branches out from the gym to those people's friends. I've noticed that. I remember, I think it was Ryan Gracie that was saying that at his gym at Gracie University, that the kids classes are really really big, but the parents would come and they would sit on the side watch the kids, and they decided they were going to stop that, and the parents had to do the classes with the kids. And I absolutely love that idea, to be honest, because it's like, why are you going to come to the gym and just sit there on the side watching the kid or wanting to coach the kid? You don't know anything about jiu-jitsu. A lot of these parents don't do jiu-jitsu. They drop their kid off at jiu-jitsu and they sit there for an hour. They should actually do jiu-jitsu with their kid. um, I think that will allow the parents to understand what they're watching, and that will allow them to better explain to other people what their kid does or something that they now like, and that could expand it a little further. But the future of jiu-jitsu tournaments, it's tough, like, because like I think you'll need like a real big brand like the UFC to come in and like add that push like they're doing with Fight Pass Invitational. You're seeing a lot more super fight shows now as well, like Karate Combat, Fight Pass Invitational, Who's Number One. The problem is with these shows is like, and like we've seen this with Metamoris, you pay these athletes what they deserve, and I think they deserve it. But at the end of the day, the business plan is just not there. Like let's say you have 5 fights on a card, like a UFC. You have 5 fights. That's 10 athletes. Let's say you pay them 15 grand each. That's 150 grand. It's like, how are you recouping your 150 grand? Like the number of pay-per-views you have to sell at $20. And then we live in a culture in jiu-jitsu where it's like, no, you're not going to pay for it because someone's going to illegally record it and then post it the next day. The same thing with instructionals, right? Like, I don't know if you guys remember MMA Tracker. It's
Who
basically
I've
where
heard of
all
it.
I've who yeah what is it? I've heard it,
so that's where like you would be able to go download all the
like
instructionals at the
Pirates
time.
Cove for MMA. Is
Yeah,
that what it was?
yeah, it
Oh,
was just
never heard
pirated
of it.
instructionals. Basically, that's where like Ryan Hall's instructionals would be leaked, and Marcelo Garcia's X Guard
Oh my
DVD
gosh.
would be leaked, and I mean, I don't know what it's called now because I haven't used something like that in a very long time, but that's where people are probably getting Gordon Ryan and John Danaher tapes and all those now. Um, but it's just like that pirate culture mixed with the pay-per-view paywall. And then the people not knowing what they're watching, the general public, it makes jujitsu very hard to expand itself. um, I think that's where the problem is. It makes it hard to incorporate prize money into jiu-jitsu tournaments. Also, there's a lot of states, to be honest, you'd be surprised, that don't allow prize money in jiu-jitsu. um, Sometimes I've
Oh,
seen tournaments give out prize money and I'm like, that's not legal in that state. um, so there's that challenge as well. You're seeing some states be like, if you want to give out prize money, you need to have blood tests, which is what happened at that Kasai event in New York City, which is probably the reason Kasai stopped operating in New York, um, because it was considered pro, and now everyone needs to be blood tested.
Mm.
Um, so there's a lot of obstacles as far as this, with athletic commissions that are beginning to pop up in certain places. There's an athletic commission that popped up in Minnesota a couple of months ago that are sanctioning jiu-jitsu there. There's a couple of weeks ago, British Columbia, Canada just got sanctioned. Um, so different places are beginning to have a lot of laws added in. It makes it hard to not only develop something, but then branch it off to a wider public.
Do you
Not sure if I
think?
answered your question. I was just ranting at that point.
Well, that I mean, that's all super. I think it's all super helpful. But I think a lot about like wrestling, right? Like wrestling. I watch.
Yeah.
I was at. I don't know where I was. I was at like my kids were playing at a local like fun house, and college wrestling was on, and I think about like that is so cool. And if people realized I mean, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, grappling is grappling, and I think because at least in, where we're at Michigan, even in the Midwest, like everybody either wrestled or knew someone who wrestled, and so like they kind of understand like the point is to take the other dude down. Like that's the point of it.
That's the point.
Do you think right? That's the goal, right? Like that's a pretty simple rule set. What do you think that the rules right now, i.e., like if I
Well,
pull
it's actually
guard,
what you just said.
go ahead.
It's what
Sorry.
you just said. Like if you know someone who's wrestled, if everyone knows someone who's wrestled, if it's the same way with jujitsu, then it would make jujitsu easier to understand as well, right?
They all wrestled, but even if you don't like I'm a good example of like I knew people who wrestled. They didn't talk
Yeah.
about it, but
Yeah.
like I was like, oh, you get the other dude down. You start on your feet,
Yeah.
get the hold them down, right? But
Yeah.
do you think that the rules cater to a little bit more of a passive like guard pulling, right? You pull guard, you hold them in the guard, you're winning that turn. I mean, 9 times out of 10, you're winning that tournament, even if nothing happens. Do
Well,
you
it
think
depends on the rule
just
set.
do you think the entertainment value is just not there to generate like the interest? Because and then follow up question: can we expect Grappling Industries to run a tournament where you penalize guard pulling? and just throwing it out. I mean, I'm gonna shoot my shot here. I'm just I'm
I think
I'm gonna
repping the
secret
people.
record.
I'm just repping the people.
I'm gonna yeah, I'm gonna start secret recording you every time you pull guard, Fox. Every time you pull guard, I'm gonna have some secret cameras in the gym, like you don't.
Every time I pull guard and stay there for 6 minutes, you can publicly laud me. That's fine. Publicly shame.
I think if you introduce like jujitsu at a younger age to a wider audience, like it doesn't matter how entertaining it is, just as long as what people will understand it and people will be drawn to it. So if you look at like the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, where jujitsu is now in high schools, like jujitsu is beginning to get into high schools in the UK as of 6 months ago. So that's going to introduce because the thing is, the first time you learn basketball or soccer, it's in elementary school in a gym class, right?
Absolutely.
That's like when you learn the rules of a sport. Like gym class in school is for that, not just physical activity, but to teach you the rules of these sports. So if you blend in jujitsu into that, then people will understand what jujitsu is at a younger age and they'll remember it as they move on. The entertainment level is still like, yeah, I think there needs to be a few rule changes. I think you need to stop. The thing is, like, I was a guard jumper as well, man. So
I played guard up until pretty much brown belt. Like, but I'm not like we stayed there, right? Like that was the thing is like I just remember like don't let him out of the guard. It's kind of I've changed my mind on it a little bit. And there's a point to it, but I've changed my mind on it a little bit.
Well, white belt, blue belt, you're going to try to master close guard, and then you're seeing a lot more open guard at the higher levels, right? Because it's hard to keep a really advanced guy in your close guard as well. Those guys just slip your guard open somehow. Yeah, there will be needing rule changes in the future for sure. Just like the direction of that is hard to know, right? Like you see ADCC trying, you see IBJJF trying to keep a traditional route. You see EBI with like an overtime where nothing happens in regulation. There's an overtime, but then people argue the overtime rules are kind of weird. I'm not a fan of EBI overtimes, but that's just me. Also, like I tried to actually implement EBI overtimes into Grappling Industries a long time ago. Eddie Bravo had given me a few invitation spots to EBI, so you could win Grappling Industries to qualify into EBI.
Wow.
And I remember that tournament, besides for the professional division, the amateur, like the beginners and intermediates, they were not very familiar with that rule set actually. So it's like there was a lot of education that went into it. I'm like, okay, this is not actually as big as you would think it is. It's like something that like the pros, the people who are really into jiu-jitsu like watching. But again, like hobbyists, that's the thing, I guess. Hobbyists don't even know the rules of jiu-jitsu when you think about it.
So no penalizing of guard pulling in the near future.
I think like
grappling.
Preventing guard jumping is the first thing. Guard pulling is different because like it's implying jiu-jitsu. That's the issue with it, right? Because the thing is, if you want to take me down, where are you going to end up? You're going to end up in my guard, right? If I do it right. I just want to skip that. That's true, but why don't just I pull guard and then you end up in my guard, right? And this way I don't have to wrestle you. What if I have been wrestling, but I know you're a better wrestler than me? And
All
there's
right.
ways to pull. There's ways to pull as well. Like look at the way Gordon like went into the leg lock against Nicky Rod at ADCC, for example. Like he teaches that setup a lot from X. So it's just yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
What
The-
if
we
what
could
if
have
we
this
award
discussion for
what if,
hours.
4 points for a takedown, and if you pull guard and not like you get a 2 point penalty if nothing happens for like a minute. Like if you're just because there's a difference
sign a
between
petition?
you're trying to I know I'm bartering with them I know.
I think to be honest, like you have to. If I was to create like a new league and just make something for this, I would say you just have to get rid of the whole guard pull, guard jump, and just say you can't do that. It's not minus points or anything like that. It's the same way as you can't kick in boxing.
Mm,
Like the rules would be like you have to wrestle to the ground, wrestle or throw to the ground, and then if someone tries to pull, like you have to stand them back up. Um,
uh, yeah.
you have to just completely get rid of it.
Yeah, and
There's so many.
that would
There's
turn into
so
catch. That would turn a little bit more into catch.
yeah. There's
But
so
maybe
many
but that's
different
that's
like
the thing,
rule
right?
sets.
Sorry.
There's a lot of different minor changes from one rule set to another, and I think that's the. Uh, I don't know if I can see that going away because it's not like you take basketball all across the world. It's most popular here, but the rule sets could vary so widely, and grappling as soon as you start between the takedown between the where the points are scored. There's so many different ones. I think it's hard to like come to the right and correct one because everybody has their own opinion and personality on what their definition of it. Like IBJJF is like, they're extra conservative when it comes to the scoring system. On and you could win by advantages all day long and rack those up, and you could you could play the stalling, and I don't think it makes it worse. It's just a different type of like rule set. So I think
From a
everybody's, you know,
from a promoter standpoint, every time you add a rule two, you're moving away from unity with the other tournaments as well. And it's another thing you have to educate all your referees on. So, like, if you go into a new city and all the referees have been working only with IBJJF in that city, and then you're like in my case, for example, well, we don't have advantages. So it's like, oh, what
right.
happens on the second or third penalty? Well, it goes warning, 2 points, disqualification. There needs to be more and more education, and then competitors are coming into a tournament. They're thinking that like all the rules are the same at every tournament, and it's not like that. And that's
Yeah.
the next problem that we run into is like when you look at basketball or hockey or soccer, those sports have one rule set. It's very straightforward. Even in wrestling, wrestling is pretty straightforward
Yeah.
as far as the rules. It's not like that in jiu-jitsu. There's just so many rule sets. Some
Yeah.
have points, some have advantages. Um, yeah, some have different submissions than others. Some have penalizing, like you said, guard post.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point of introducing it at an early age, basketball and those things. It's really strange. It's really strange to think that the big sponsors they just want it's risk management. I get it, right? Like you don't, especially with how there's got to be a swing the other direction, dude. Everything is getting so soft. Like the fact that you get an injury at Taekwondo, like I have seen incredible injuries in football and basketball and oh my goodness, soccer injuries. So like it can't just be
Yeah.
like, oh, we don't do combat sports because we want to avoid injury, right? Like that can't. I'm telling Red Bull what to do, but it seems like Nike or Adidas or I mean, like that, there would get some money in there, and then that would because to put all those mainstream sports into like elementary school, I mean that's kind of state funding that puts them there, right? Or at least an intro level, and
Yeah.
everyone's got a rudimentary that is interesting. Like a good portion of the population, at least, was at some point in their life introduced to how to dribble a basketball, how to
Yep.
dribble. Nobody, the far majority of the population were not introduced to combat, and it's just like, if we're gonna weigh those two, right? Which one is actually holds more value? Dribbling a basketball or like self defense scenario?
Well, all those traditional sports have some type of end goal, right? Like you put the basketball in the hoop, or you put the soccer ball in the net, or you put the puck in the net, or
Yeah.
you bring that football past that end zone. In jiu-jitsu, it gets very blurry there. Now it's like you have to submit your opponent. Yeah, that's a lot harder than, if we're talking shit about, like, for example, European football and how they have big nets, but a lot of the scores are like 0-0, 1-0, 2-0, 2-1. Look at jiu-jitsu. A lot of matches don't end in submission. They end up with points. They end up with advantages. A lot of them are not very entertaining scrambles. We talk, like when you guys were saying, like it was easy to win by advantages. Like you get into a 50-50 battle in the gi at a high level, like black belt, you win like 7 advantages to 6 advantages. Nothing really happened in the match. Like the other sports have very easy goals. Like you need to score. But in jiu-jitsu, it's like scoring doesn't win matches. The submission wins matches. But because the submission is so rare, you need to score, and then the scoring is all over the place. And even then, like
David,
most of us can't agree on what scoring is in jiu-jitsu half the time.
when are you coming back to Michigan personally so we can take you out to some of the best Middle Eastern food outside of the Middle East, hands down? Right here
First
in
of all,
Dearborn. When are you coming back to Southwest Michigan?
I'd have to check my schedule actually, but I would love Middle Eastern food actually. I have traveled throughout the Middle East. Um, Unbelievable food and hospitality, to be completely honest. Um, but probably like the next Detroit tournament, I would have to check my calendar on that one, to be honest.
Well, David, we appreciate your time and talking shop, and as always, I think the next. I think the next Detroit is July. Like I think that's where we're.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where that's our
David,
next team tournament actually is
July
David,
6th. Yeah, so July 6th, I think
my
I'm at
earpiece
an
went
event
off.
in London.
My earpiece went off. Are you coming down for some Mediterranean food in Southeast Michigan?
I think July 6th I'm doing a tournament in London, actually London, England.
Okay,
We're going back to downtown London, so it was an event that I had
nice.
planned to be at it for a while. So I'm gonna plan to be at the next one after July. Um,
Okay.
right on. Well,
I think yeah.
go go ahead, David. I appreciate your time, brother. I know we ran a little bit over, but obviously you'll see our team at Grappling Industries. I know our affiliations, Palm and Central, and them they like to support as well. So if you guys haven't checked out Grappling Industries, be sure to check them out. So I think David made a good point. You're paying for matches, right? If you're gonna pay, I mean, all the tournaments are within now $10 of each other. So you're paying for matches, and you'll get the most mat experience, there. So, all right, guys. Well, I appreciate your time as always. We'll see you on the mats.